So about 30 years ago, David and Marta, they sat down to create a new TV show called Insomnia Cafe. Gotcha. Insomnia Cafe. And it was going to be a little bit like Cheers. Anybody old enough to have watched Cheers here? Except instead of it being around a bar, it would center around a coffee shop. And Cheers, on the surface, Cheers was a show about a bar, but it wasn't really a show about a bar. And it was the theme song that kind of betrayed the underlying thrust of what Cheers was about. And even if you don't know the show Cheers, even if you don't know the whole theme song, there's a good chance you probably know at least one line from the theme song. If you do, I need you to help me out. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. Like you want to be able to walk into a bar and everybody be like, Norm, right? Like that's what made Cheers so gripping for an entire generation, because we want to be able to go into a place, pull up a seat at the bar and Cheers, and everyone know us and see us and delight in us. And so now it's 1993, Cheers just finished, and there needs to be something to replace it. And so David and Marta say, we're going to do the same thing, something similar, but we're going to do it around a coffee shop. We're going to call it Insomnia Cafe. They pitch it to NBC, and NBC's like, we like it, but it needs some tweaks, because let's face it, the coffee shop, it's a little extraneous. We know what it's really about. It's about friendship. And a few months later, Friends aired for the very first time. And it gripped our hearts of a generation. Like, it's weird, but for like an entire generation, Friends was more than just a show. It was something that we actually gathered with our own friends to watch, because it just tapped into something deep about what we want in life. In fact, the series finale of Friends, when it aired in 2004, that single episode was the most watched episode of TV for that entire decade. From 2000 to 2010, the series finale of Friends was the most watched episode, because there was something about it where you felt like you were the seventh friend. Like this was your community of friends that you could be a part of. And then in like the last decade, there was a renaissance of the TV show. It made it to streaming platforms, and a whole new generation that wasn't even alive when it like finished started to discover Friends again. And they thought it was like a new show, like a period piece about the 90s. That's a literal quote. But they started to discover it, and then it like picked up on Netflix. In 2018, watching Friends accounted for 4% of the streaming activity of Netflix in 2018. Almost a quarter of a century after it first aired, it started to resonate with a new generation, because it tapped into something we all crave. One of the co-creators, David Crane, responding to the Renaissance, how there's a whole new generation finding it, he captured it really well. He says, there's a wonderful part of all of us, that you want to feel like your friends are your family. You do have that community. You do have that support system. There is that hope for kids, even those who are discovering it today, that when they're at that age, he means the age of the characters in Friends, which now I'm past that age, they'll have that. They will have those kinds of friends, because we want to be a part of that kind of community. And so today, we're kicking off a new series, and you guessed it, we're calling it Insomnia Cafe. No, we're calling it Friends. And if you're tuning in online, you're here in the room. I don't know if you cared much for the TV show, if it gripped you at all, but there's two things I know for certain. Two things I know. One is that friendship is eroding in this country. And I don't mean just individual friendships are eroding. I mean friendship as a category is eroding across the country. In fact, earlier this year, the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, he released an 80-page report called Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. This is the Surgeon General saying there's an epidemic among us of loneliness and isolation. It's reached epidemic proportions. It is threatening us, because on every measurable category, our social connections, they're dissolving. We're becoming increasingly separated. Our family units are dissolving more and more. Our time spent with companions is eroding more and more. Our involvement in social groups and clubs is disappearing more and more. In fact, even for practicing Christians, most of you would consider yourself practicing Christians. Even for practicing Christians, the frequency with which practicing Christians in the country are even showing up to church and being with each other is decreasing more and more. It's actually, it got to the point where it was so bad. Some of us, we might even think like, oh, this is because of the pandemic. You might think that, right? But it actually got so bad that Barna, they're a research group, in January and February of 2020, so right before the pandemic, they did a massive nationwide research project on loneliness and isolation right before the pandemic. They didn't know a pandemic was coming when they did this. Massive nationwide survey. And then the pandemic hit. And so they're like, well, surely lockdowns, social distancing, we should do that research again to see how everything has changed in the last several months since the pandemic hit. And what they found is what other researchers found, that lockdowns and social distancing did not significantly increase loneliness in our country. What? How is it possible that lockdowns and social distancing aren't increasing dramatically the experience of loneliness in our country? But what they found is that the structure and the function and the quality of our relationships before the pandemic, so it's not that we weren't interacting with other people, it's not that we weren't connected to other people, but the structure of those relationships, like the variety of them and how frequently you're getting together, the function of those relationships, like having people who are speaking into your life and people, confidants that you could share life with, and the quality, the intimacy, the depth of those relationships was of such a poor quality already before the pandemic that lockdowns and social distancing didn't significantly increase loneliness. It's reaching epidemic proportions. Friendship is eroding in this country. The second thing that I know is that you need friends. You need friends. And some of you might be like, maybe other people need friends. I'm pretty good on my own. I am a strong, independent woman or man. And I am, I don't need to rely on other people. I got this thing figured out and I don't need other people. But you need friends. I promise you that you need friends. In fact, the Surgeon General, in that report that he released, he said this. He said, despite current advancements that now allow us to live without engaging with others, for example, food delivery, automation, remote entertainment, our biological need for connection remains. That you actually have a biological, sure, you might not need other people to pay the bills, to feed you, to clothe you, to entertain you. You might be able to do that without people, but you have a biological need to connect with other people. And when that need isn't being met, it's deadly. Look what he says. He says, loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both individuals and societal health. It's associated with greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. Loneliness will kill you. And some of you might be saying, well, that's fine, but I'm not lonely. We're like, sure, I'm a bit of a loner. I don't like a lot of other people in my life. I'm pretty independent, but I don't feel lonely. And that's fair because loneliness is a subjective feeling. It's that subjective feeling of distress where your relationships aren't meeting your expectations. And that's personal and subjective. Two people can be experiencing the same circumstances, same situation, and one might feel lonely and the other one might not. And you might say, I don't feel lonely, so none of that applies to me. But there's also something called isolation, social isolation. This is the objective experience of having poor or insufficient social connections or infrequent social connections. And look what the Surgeon General says about isolation. He says loneliness and social isolation increase the risk for premature death by 26 and 29% respectively. So social isolation, even if you don't feel lonely, is even deadlier than simply being lonely. More broadly, lacking social connection can increase the risk for premature death as much as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. All right, so what you're telling me is that if you smoke 10 cigarettes a day and you have a close group of friends, you are healthier than the person who doesn't smoke any cigarettes but has no friends. That's what he's saying, right? That's crazy. Up to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. If you're still smoking 15 cigarettes a day, just so you know, we've learned that that'll kill you. You probably should stop. But loneliness and social isolation is just as deadly. And he goes on, he says, in addition, poor or insufficient social connection. So he's not even talking about full-on isolation, but even if your relationships are poor or insufficient, It's associated with increased risk of disease, including a 29% increased risk of heart disease, 32% increased risk of stroke. You need friends, right? And this is just the biological implications of it. This doesn't even get into all of the psychological implications of depression and anxiety and suicidality, all of which go up with social isolation and loneliness, or even the sociological implications of this, where there's breakdowns of community and community safety, and there's decreased trust and tribalism, polarization, all of this coming from loneliness and social isolation. You need friends. In this 80-page document by the Surgeon General, when he gets to the middle, he spends the first half of it just talking about the problem, laying it out, and then he goes into his solutions. When he gets to the middle, on page 45, when he's about to transition and say, like, hey, how are we going to deal with this? He starts it off by saying this. He says, the world is just beginning to recognize the vital importance of social connection. And I read that, and I underlined it, and then I laughed a little bit. I chuckled, really? The world is we're just now beginning to realize the vital importance of social connection? Because I don't know about you, I'm a Bible person. And so, maybe some of you think the Bible is just like a cool old religious text. For me, I really do believe that it's God's word. And on page 1 of the Bible, God creates everything. On page 2 of the Bible, it gives us a little more detail in the creation of humanity. God creates the very first person, calls him Adam, and after God creates this person, he shares 2 things that are of vital importance for human health and human thriving. 2 things that are vitally important for human health and survival. And the first is that we need to trust God by submitting to his word. He tells Adam, trust me. You just got to trust me. Listen to what I say, all right? I'm going to give you everything. I'm going to give you all of these trees, eat anything you want. But there's just one. Just trust me. Don't eat from that one. It'll go great as long as you don't eat that one. Trust me in that. Submit to my word. But if you don't, it's going to kill you. It's going to be deadly, the ramifications of it. So that's the first thing of vital importance. If you want to survive, trust God, submit to his word. But the second thing that comes immediately after this, all right? So God says, don't eat from the tree. If you do, you're going to die. The very next words are this. He says, the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. It's not good. This is vitally important. All right, maybe the world is just beginning to realize the vital importance of social connection, but God's been saying it from the very beginning. And I want you to just appreciate the gravity of this statement, because was Adam alone? Was he actually alone? No, God was there, right? And yet, God was saying there was still something missing. So God is saying, get this, God is saying that God himself isn't enough for Adam. It almost sounds sacrilegious, but God is saying that God himself isn't enough for Adam, that he created Adam in a way to need other people. That you have a biological need. It is vitally important for you to be connected in social relationships with other people. If you've ever heard somebody say, oh, it's just me and Jesus. It's just me and I don't need any other people. It's me and Jesus. Well, God thinks that's insufficient because he's wired you in a way where you need friends. You need to be in community with other people. And I love the way that the story plays out because God says this, right? He reveals the need. And then he lets Adam feel the need. So he takes Adam and he just parades all of these animals in front of Adam and makes Adam just kind of watch it, name the animals. Adam's just watching. He's like, interesting. There's somebody for the bears, and there's somebody for the dogs, and there's somebody for the cats, and there's nobody for me. So God reveals the need. He lets Adam feel the need. And then God deals with the need, and he creates Eve. And it's so satisfying. And then it describes the nature of that satisfying moment where God meets that need. He deals with that need, and it describes it this way. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. I love that picture. They were naked and unashamed. When it talks about being naked and unashamed, it's not only talking about the physical aspect of being naked and not having any body image issues and just being like, hey, here I am. It does include that, but it goes beyond that to include just this full transparency, full vulnerability. Here I am, look at me. You could see every part of who I am, and for the other person to not just accept that, to not just tolerate it, to love it, to delight in it. See, this is why you need friends, you need relationships, you need other people in your life. And it can be romantic relationships, it doesn't have to be, but even if it is a romantic relationship, we need this. We need this experience where we get to be seen truly and delighted in deeply. You were created to experience that. Your soul craves it. And you don't need this from everyone. You don't need everyone to see you truly and delight in you deeply, but you need someone. And not just someone, you need more than one person. You need a community of people who will see you, look at you, and delight in you. Your soul craves it. Right? Have you ever hung out with somebody, you kind of met a new friend, you hang out with them, and you walk away from that experience and you're just like, that was great. I want to spend more time with that person. Right? You ever experienced that? You're just like, maybe you didn't know them before, and you spend time with them, and you're like, that was really fun. I want to do that again. See, your soul craves to be on the other side of that. That when people spend time with you and they get to see you and experience you, they say, man, that was delightful. I want to do that again. On Wednesday, I was picking my daughter up from preschool, and she was coming out, and like you could see through the glass doors as she was heading out the door, and some of her friends were already outside, and they were looking in, and one of the friends saw her and said, Kara. And then for some reason, all of the kids outside just start chanting her name, Kara, Kara, Kara. And so she just opens the door to, this crowd of people chanting her name. And she's 4. She's never experienced anything like this. She doesn't even know what is going on, but she is so happy. Her face, there's this confusion, but she was just like floating out the door, like, I am seen and I'm delighted in. And we were made for that. In fact, they've observed this in infants, in newborns, that they can actually, they've done brain scans with babies, because babies will fixate on faces. Newborn babies will fixate on faces. And when they see the face of an adult looking at them, and the adult's face shows signs of joy, the baby's brain lights up with joy. Even just like micro gestures of joy expressed by the adult, the infant intrinsically, they know that someone is looking at them and delighting in them. And they found that this is one of the most important aspects for neurological development for kids, because you were created to be in community with people who will see you truly and delight in you deeply. And this was what Adam and Eve had. They were naked and unashamed. Unfortunately, Adam and Eve were 2 flawless people living in a perfect world. And then we turn the page, and things go sideways, right? And there were two things of vital importance that God said we as human beings need. 2 things: we need to trust him by submitting to his word, and that we need relationships with people. These are 2 things of vital importance known from the very beginning. And Adam and Eve, they start to question, can we really trust God? And they decide not to submit to his word. And they do the very thing he told them not to do. They take a bite of that fruit, each of them. And immediately after it says, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. And so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. And there goes naked and unashamed. But you notice what happened? They violated the first thing of vital importance, and immediately after, the second is what starts to erode. So they violate this first one, but it's their relationship with each other that's already starting to erode immediately as they make this decision. As we continue through this passage, we see that the relationship between them, it gets harder and harder, and there's increased separation. There's 4 things that I want to look at today. I'm going to call them seeds of separation. 4 seeds of separation that I believe are actually in every relationship you have with every other human being. I think from this moment on, every one of your relationships carries with it these 4 seeds of separation. And we're kicking off a new series today. We're not going to solve all of these problems. We're not going to solve all these problems in a series, but we're going to hopefully give you tools and strategies and ways of coping with this and not like leaning into this. In the series today, we're not going to be able to do all of that. But as we kind of just go through these 4 seeds, what I want you to do for today is I want you to be thinking about your relationships. And I want you to be thinking about, where are these seeds showing up in my relationships? Where is it showing up in my marriage? Where is it showing up with my coworkers, with my neighbors? Where is it showing up in the relationships that I don't have because I've pushed people away or whatever? But just try to think, where are these 4 seeds showing up in your relationships? Because I can almost guarantee that all 4 of these are probably showing up in some capacity. And like any seed, if you water it, if you nurture it, it's going to grow. And it's going to increase separation. But the sooner we pluck it out, the sooner we can remove that separation, bring reconciliation and healing. So 4 seeds of separation. The first one is what we already saw already. They realize they're naked, they sew fig leaves together, and they cover themselves. Because into this place of security, they are infested now with shame. Right? They were so secure. I'm just naked and unashamed. I can just stand here and let you see me and know that you're going to delight in me. But now they know there's some stuff about themselves that isn't delightful, and they don't want the other person to see that. So they're going to cover that up, and they're going to now try to control what other people get to see of themselves. They're going to conceal the stuff that either they don't think is going to be delightful, or in fact, there's some things that they feel, it's not just that it's not delightful, it's disgusting, it's repulsive. If people see this, they're going to be disgusted. And so we cover that up. And we just put our best foot forward, right? You see this especially in like first dates and job interviews, right? You just put out there what you want people to see, right? When you're on a first date, you let them know, like, I have a great 401k. You don't let them know about that like secret Star Wars collection that you have at home, right? You let them see, the face with all the makeup. You wear closed-toe shoes. They don't see the gnarly toes that you have. You conceal the things about yourself that you think, that's not going to be delightful, or maybe it's going to be repulsive. And so you hide that from other people, right? Nobody on a job interview, they're like, what's your weakness? It's like, I work too hard, right? We even can control what people see because we know there's stuff about us that isn't delightful. So we settle, and instead of being seen truly and delighted in deeply, we settle for being seen partially, so maybe we can be delighted in it all. Or maybe for you, the sense of shame is so great and so pervasive in your life that you actually keep everyone at arm's length. You actually allow yourself to be isolated from community because you feel like if anybody sees too much of me, they aren't going to delight in me. And already there's these seeds of separation being sown into our relationships. It can happen in our romantic relationships, our friendships, our acquaintances, our neighbors. We create distance. We hide. We conceal. It's the first seed of separation. The second seed of separation is that group identity is infested with individualism. Individualism, not individuality. Individuality, that's a good thing, like you're your own person. Individualism is something else. Individualism is saying, no, I'm distinct, I'm set apart, I'm distinguishing myself from other people. Look what happens, all right? So God comes down and he's like, hey, Adam and Eve, where are you guys? Adam's like, we realized we were naked, so we're just hiding in the bushes. I was like, that's funny, you've been naked your whole life. What changed? Didn't happen to eat the fruit I told you not to eat, huh? What does Adam say? He says, oh my goodness, God, you're right, we did it. I'm so sorry. Could you ever forgive us? No, that's not what Adam says. Adam says, the woman you put here with me, she gave me some of the fruit from the tree and I ate it. And what's shocking about this isn't so much that Adam throws Eve under the bus and like blame shifts, but it's actually how he even refers to her, the woman. Like just a few minutes ago, Adam and Eve were a we. They were a one flesh unit. Like you couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. They were in us. And now Eve is that woman and Adam is me, myself, and I. And that sort of group identity that they shared is starting to devolve because there's this seed of individualism that's being sown into that relationship. And it makes sense on paper because Adam's saying, wait a second, oh, shoot, I did something bad. Ooh, I got it. If I take this bad thing that I did and I put it on Eve, and then I distinguish myself from her, then I'll still look like I'm delightful, right? That makes sense. Here's the problem. Adam just alienated himself from the only other human being. He just alienated himself from the very person who could see him truly and delight in him deeply. So sure, maybe he's not taking the blame for it, but he's created this separation from the people around him. And I know there are marriages probably in this room right now where the two spouses, you guys are just fixated. You're dead set on proving that the other one is the problem, right? You're determined to say, my spouse is the problem. Let me just put all the blame on them, because if they're the problem, then I'm not. And then maybe I'm still delightful. Meanwhile, you're alienating yourself from the very person who God gave you to see you truly and delight in you deeply. And it's not just in marriages. It happens in all of our relationships where we distinguish ourselves from those people. Those people. I'm not one of those people. It's this whole us versus them sort of mentality. In fact, the famous French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, which I don't know if there is a more French name than Pierre Bourdieu. I think you have to do the U at the end too. Pierre Bourdieu, he spent his whole life and his whole professional life researching. He wanted to know, what is that commonality among all people? The thing that drives people, no matter what, if you are from some remote tribe in a place nobody's ever heard of, or if you're living in high French society, what is common between these two people? He spent his whole life researching this, and he came to the conclusion that the driving force behind all people is the drive for distinction. Distinction. The drive to say, I'm different from them, to set ourselves apart from other people. It's so much a part of who we are now that we actually push other people away. We say, I'm not like them, because if I'm not like them, then maybe I can feel like I'm delightful, or at least a little more delightful than they are. Meanwhile, we're alienating ourselves from the people around us, the community that is given to us by God to see us truly and delight in us deeply. It's the second seed of separation, and it's taking group identity, which for the record, group identity is largely responsible for character formation on a neurological level. So modern neuroscientists are discovering that group identity, and this experience of group identity, this is how our character is formed. And into that, it's being infested with this individualism, where we're constantly trying to distinguish ourselves from other people. The third seed of separation is that companionship is infested with competition. So God hears all of this, and he says to Adam and Eve, not good, guys, not good. There's going to be some consequences for your actions. And he turns to Eve, and he says, Eve, the whole childbearing thing, it's going to hurt. And then he goes on, and he says, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Now, when it says your desire will be for him, it's not like, Eve, you're going to be smitten with your husband, and he's going to rule over you. That's not what it means by your desire. This phrase, it means that you're going to desire to control him, but he's going to control you. So you're going to have this desire to rule over him, and he's going to rule over you. And into this relationship, that should have been companionship, like the two of us versus the world. We're going to go out and do great things together. Now, there's this competition between them. There's this struggle for power, struggle to get the upper hand in the relationship. I know it's the wrong TV show for the series, but any Seinfeld fans? Okay, anybody remember that episode of Seinfeld where George Costanza is fixated on getting the upper hand in the relationship? He's dating some girl, and he becomes obsessed with this idea that he needs to get the upper hand in the relationship, because he finally wants to be in a relationship where he has the upper hand, where they're out together and people see the two of them together and say, she's lucky to be with him, right? And so he plays all these games, and it backfires and all of that. And of course, it's a caricature of a very real phenomenon, that we struggle, into our relationships that should have been companionship. There's this competition, and we struggle for power in the relationship. And we want to be able to have the power, have the control, so that other people are able to be used by us to advance our cause. And the tools, the weapons that we use in this battlefield, they're so subtle, but I'm sure you know what they are, right? We make jokes that just play into their insecurities, so they just feel a little inferior a little more of the time. You do things to just make them feel stupid, or maybe you just belittle them and their ideas and their feelings, or you gang up with other people and show how weak or silly they are, and little by little, you're just kind of reinforcing this message that I'm the superior one, you're the inferior one. We gain power in the relationship and we gain control. Or maybe you push people away before they can push you away. Right? Because if you're the one pushing away, that means you're in control. You have the power. So if you can push them away before they get to push you away, you get to be powerful. Or maybe you're just surrounded by people that you don't even register them as people. They're just kind of like pawns that are around that maybe you're going to use, maybe you won't, to advance your cause or whatever you want. And maybe for others, it's just people are collateral damage along the way. But into our relationships, there's this spirit of competition, wanting to rule over the other. And it's so pervasive. Among the younger generation. So the younger you are, the worse the loneliness and isolation is. Sorry, Fusion kids. But the data's in, and with each successive generation, loneliness and isolation increases. And a lot of people want to point the finger at social media, and that definitely plays a role. But you talk to some of these kids, and you realize that they're growing up in a world where they are conditioned to prioritize their achievement and success at all costs. And while they're around more people than any of us as adults get to be in a given setting, they're around the competition all day long. They're around the kids that are fighting to get into the same college and start in the team. And these people, they don't have room for friendship and meaningful connection. It's competition. And it's being bred into the next generation, and we're getting lonelier and more isolated because competition, it's growing up in the place of companionship. And we see this with Adam and Eve. The fourth seed of separation is that purpose is infested with pressure. Purpose is infested with pressure. So God turns to Adam and he says, Adam, curses the ground because of you, because of what you did. This is your curse. Through painful toil, you'll eat food from it all the days of your life, and it'll produce thorns and thistles for you, and you'll eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground. So you turn back a page and you realize God actually created Adam to work the ground. So working the ground is part of Adam's design purpose, that he was built to work and create and cultivate things. That's a good thing. But the curse here is that it's going to suck now. It's going to be hard. It's going to drain the life out of you as you try to do this thing that you and Eve, you were supposed to be companions on the same team, doing this together, thriving. It's supposed to be life-giving. Now it's just going to drain the life out of you. And instead of there being this feeling of purpose, it's just going to feel like pressure to get by. And this, of course, doesn't relate specifically to Adam's relationship with Eve, but indirectly, you know this is going to affect their relationship. Because Adam comes home after a day of work like that, and his back is sore, and there's sweat on his brow, and he's pulling thorns out of his side. He is not going to be singing songs over his wife when he gets home. It's gonna affect the relationship. And the pressure, and you guys know the pressure, the busyness, all of that. You're just trying to make ends meet. Like, you don't have time for friends. You don't have time for relationships. You don't have emotional margin for this, because into what's supposed to be our purpose, there's all of this pressure. And here we are, and we're running, just trying to keep up with the Joneses. Meanwhile, what God said is vitally important. How about you just become friends with the Joneses? You should. Ian and Dara Jones, they're great people. But yeah, we're out here, we're running, we're trying to survive, and God's saying, actually, you need to be doing this together. That's where life is going to come into this. I can almost guarantee that in every one of your relationships, the relationships you have and the relationships that you've canceled, there are going to be these seeds of separation. And over the coming weeks, I want you to just be thinking about every time you realize there's this moment where you pull away or you push someone away or somebody else pulls away in a moment, to be looking, what are the seeds of separation that have been cultivated here? Whether you're the one cultivating or they're the one cultivating, don't even worry about who's the blame. But acknowledge these seeds of separation, because they entered into the story here and they haven't left the story. And if we're actually going to be able to combat loneliness and isolation, we have to get to these seeds, and we have to realize we got to stop. First off, we have to stop watering them. We have to stop cultivating them. And then we need to rip them out. And we need to do it as soon as possible, because the longer something gets rooted in, the harder it is to pluck that out, right? And for some of you, you're going to be in relationships. You're going to realize you've spent decades letting these roots of all four of these just kind of grow. And it is a damaged relationship. And it's going to feel like impossible to bring healing into that. But I want to leave you with some hope. I promised before that we're not going to solve all these problems today, but I do want to know that this story ends on a note of hope. I'm going to invite the band to come back up. But God does something surprising. God could have just said, to hell with you guys. I'm done with you. I'm going to walk away. But instead, God does something shocking. He says, the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them. God looked at those flimsy fig leaves that they sewed together to cover their shame and their nakedness, and he says, guys, that's not going to cut it. I know you tried your best, but that's not going to do it. And he took it upon himself to cover up their guilt and their shame. But it came at a cost. Because up to this point in this story, there has been no death, right? There's only been creation. There's only been life. There's only been good. And God said, hey, if you guys eat from this tree, you're going to die. But God doesn't kill them that day. Instead, God kills an innocent animal. Spills the blood of this innocent animal, and then he takes that animal and he makes clothes out of those animal skins, and he takes them and he covers up Adam and Eve's nakedness. Covers up their shame and their guilt. And I want you to get this. I want you to see this. He covers up their shame and their guilt, not just so that they can stand before him secure. He covers up their shame and their guilt so they can stand before each other. So they don't have to hide from each other. God is restoring his relationship with them so that they can be restored to one another. And this moment of God sacrificing this innocent animal, of course, is foreshadowing of all the sacrifices that would be offered up in the temple by the people of Israel to cover their sin and their shame and their guilt. And of course, it's even pointing ahead to Jesus, his ultimate sacrifice on the cross for you and for me. And Jesus, he gave us this image to use to remember what he did for us, to remember this moment that he took on flesh and he let his flesh be pierced and his blood to spill to cover up your sin and your shame. And hopefully you were able to receive cup of the elements on your way in. If you weren't, you could just raise your hand and one of the ushers can grab that for you, or you can go grab one yourself. But in the lid of it, there's a little wafer on the top part of the lid there. And I just wanted to pull out that little wafer. Because Jesus, he gave us this meal to remember his sacrifice. And he says, when you eat the bread, just remember my body given over for you. And I want you to remember in this moment, to be reminded that God isn't covering you with animal skins. That God sent his son in the flesh. Let that flesh be pierced for you so that you and your guilt and your shame and everything that's not delightful, everything that is truly disgusting about you could be covered up, not with animal skins, but with the righteousness of Jesus Christ. And as you take this, I want you to remember you are clothed in the righteousness of Christ. Take and eat. Jesus said that this cup is the cup of the new covenant in his blood. A covenant. A covenant is this binding agreement where God himself, who should have just been like, you guys, you made your mess. I'm done. I'm out. Instead, he leans in and doesn't just say, hey, I'm going to be there for you. He just say, I'll be there for you. No, he actually says, guys, I'm going to establish an eternal covenant with you. Like marriage. I'm going to marry myself to you. I'm not going anywhere. I'm binding myself to you in my blood. And every time you drink this cup, be reminded that I am yours and you are mine. Drink of this. Because of the sacrifice of Jesus, the fact that you're in this covenant relationship with him, the fact that your sins have been forgiven and washed away, we're told that God right now is singing over you. You know, he sees you truly and he delights in you deeply. But this isn't just about you and God. This isn't just about your relationship with him. We're told in Colossians that God is reconciling not just you, God is reconciling all things. To reconcile means to take these two things that have been separated, he's bringing them back together. He's reuniting them. Ephesians, we're told that all things are being united in Christ. So God is not just reconciling you to himself, he's reconciling you to himself so that you can be an agent of reconciliation in this world. He's clothing you, covering your nakedness and shame, not just so you could stand secure before him, so that you could stand secure before each other. And Jesus, he rose from the dead after this, and he's promised I'm gonna make all things new, and all the stuff that's ruined and broken about relationships, I'm gonna fix it one day. He hasn't done that yet, which means I can't promise you that you won't experience loneliness and isolation in this world. Even if you do everything right, you might experience loneliness and isolation. Jesus did everything right, and he experienced both of those things. But as you lean into the sacrifice of Jesus, here's what I can promise you. That he will give you the security and the humility and the selflessness and the love so that you can be the friend that our lonely and isolated world needs. So that you can be an agent of reconciliation. Let me pray. Father, we thank you that in your kindness, you are committed to us. You don't see us simply as the toxic people that you need to separate yourself from. Instead, you pursue us, chase after us. You sacrifice for us. You clothe us. God, we thank you for that mercy and that grace. And God, I pray that we, your church, can be agents of reconciliation, that we can go to a world that is so lonely and so isolated, that is dying in loneliness and isolation, and that your church can be the solution, that we could be the friend that the world desperately needs. Bring hope, healing, and restoration. Pray for this in Jesus' name. Amen.